want to thank everyone for joining us for this session where music business executive, author, manager, whatever you want to call Miles Copeland III, he's done it and he's continuing to do it with his own company. He'll be joining us within the next few minutes. I believe he's dialing in from France. And Miles, to put it politely, is amazing. I don't think anyone's not going to say that Miles is not amazing or inspirational, because to guide the careers of the Police, R.E.M, the Go-Go's, and that's just a few of the bands that he's worked with and helped made a household name. I haven't done that. Probably you haven't done that either. And he is the author of this here book. And I see he is dialing in right now. He's connecting to audio. He's the author of this fantastic book right here. Miles, how is your day going so far?
So far, so good.
So far, so good. Before you got on the line, I was just telling the people listening and watching what an inspiration you are, because you're not one of these people who just has one success or one job title. We can say music business executive and manager. We could also say film producer. That's not something that people often know or associate about you. I'm going to put out the word humanitarian. Are you okay with that one too?
Well, I'd like to think I'm a humanitarian, but of course, you know, that I guess it's in the eye of the beholder, correct?
Yeah, the eye of the beholder, the eye of the tiger. So we here got a lot of questions submitted by people watching this now, watching this later. I also have some things that I want to know. So if you're ready for a bunch of questions that are disorganized and not in any semblance of an order, we will throw them at you.
Just throw them.
Okay. The first thing then, this one is from me. We are dialing in from Long Beach, New York on Long Island. And one of the first police tours of the US, if not the first one, I know played in neighboring Lido Beach at a club called Malibu. Any chance you were there for that, or you were ever in Long Beach, New York?
I was in Long Beach. Yeah, I can't remember all of the shows, but anything around New York, I definitely would have been at, both for Squeeze and for the Police early days. I mean, I think the first show the Police did in the area was at CBGB's. We also did My Father's Place. We did various other clubs, but you know, in the early days, you know, the Police were not particularly well. In the first tour, they weren't known at all. I mean, they weren't even supposed to be in the United States. And actually, the record company had told us, "What are you doing here? Go home." You know, I was actually almost thrown out of the A&M office when I showed up at the Police because the record was not released. They were not financing the tour, and it was sort of not done, you know. And I just said, look, you know, come and see the group. It's your group, you know, come and experience it and have fun, you know. And they were like, yeah, sure, get out of here. We're not giving you any money. So that was my first experience, but I can't remember all the clubs we played. I remember the Rat Club in Boston and, you know, some of the other clubs, but there were so many of them that you know, they're a bit of a haze.
I can only imagine so. And you raise a really good point there about getting in the face of the record company and that becoming one of the reasons why they prioritize the band. Because the other day I was talking about Oasis with somebody and they were saying, why weren't they so big after the second album in the States, but big elsewhere? And it could be, hey, the manager did not get in the face of the label and go, hey, we're here, or they didn't have the presence in the US. And you always made it part of your MO to remind everyone that you were alive, your artists were making great music, and you were the biggest cheerleader there was.
Yeah, I think that's really the job of a manager. So, you know, you look at a lot of the acts and, you know, the ones that made it or the ones that failed or whatever. And, you know, everyone has, you know, in some cases it was the manager that was a key factor. In some cases there was one member of the band. It was some lucky journalist, you know, that happened, you know, in the case of Bruce Springsteen, a journalist writes an amazing article and of course he ends up being the manager.
Yeah.
And you never know where that something is going to happen that is going to make your career happen. And that's part of what I was saying in the book is that, you know, you can't be too proud. And when people look at me and they say, you know, what's the most important show you ever did? and they would imagine I'd say something like, Shea Stadium in front of 80,000 people or whatever, and I would say, no, no, no. The best and most important show the Police ever played was actually the smallest audience ever. There were 4 people in the audience. It just so happened one of them was a DJ who then started banging the record. So it just goes to show that you can never be too sure. The reality is there could be somebody in the audience that could change your life. You never know. So you always got to do your best, and that's part of the, when I wrote the book, a lot of what I was trying to do was encourage people to think beyond, the normal, oh, this is, what I did, and oh, aren't I great? And, I discovered this act and that act. What I wanted to do was to really learn from the mistakes that I made and from, things that I learned along the way, sort of as an inspirational or motivational book. And, one of those things was, 4 people. I mean, most groups would have walked out, looked at an audience of 4 people and said, to hell with it, we're not playing. The Police went out and said, those 4 people bought tickets. They don't know who the hell we are. Let's give them a great show. And they did.
They did.
And it just so happened that that DJ was so enamored with them after that he became a super fan. And that's all it took.
Yeah, that one DJ in the crowd probably led to hundreds of other DJs picking up that single, and the rest is history. So the first question that comes from a local here, from Joseph G. He said, I think you literally changed music as we know it, and I thank you. No, that's not the question. That's just the first of many compliments to come. So Joseph G wants to know, as far as the Police, were there any moments that you did not think that they were destined for global success? He said also that from all the videos of that era, you appear to be their biggest fan and possibly the greatest manager as well.
Well, I think when you're in the midst of something, you're not planning. I mean, I didn't start off thinking, okay, I'm going to make this the biggest band in the world. Of course, you say that for every group, basically. You say, okay, look, we're going to go for it, But along the way, a number of things can happen. The group can shoot themselves in the foot. You get unlucky with something, who's to know, basically. But you start off and you're committed to, take it to the next step. It's like in baseball. You get up to the bat and your first thing is, okay, I got to get to first base. That's the first thing I got to do, Then when I'm at first base, I can think about second base. When I'm at second base, I can think about third. Then I can think about home. But you rarely get up and you think, well, okay, this is a home run. Your first job is to get to first base, So I think that's sort of where I came into the situation, is to say, look, I mean, for me to sit back, I mean, I would be too arrogant to be able to say, well, this group is going to be the biggest band in the world. I mean, my view was, we're going to go for it. We're going to be big. How big? I'm not going to make the prediction. I'm just going to go for it. Well, thankfully they did become the biggest band in the world. So,
yeah.
But do you plan to make that happen day one? I don't think I planned it. I just went, and like I said, my first goal was to get to first base.
That's kind of the different approach to Alan McGee, who was basically saying, this is going to be the biggest band in the world over and over and over again. So I think that proves that some people can make it on modesty and step by step, and other people can make it with bold declarations. But
well, you can make your bold declarations, but the reality is that whatever it is, you've got to go do the work. You've got to get out there and one of the important lessons that I say in the book was, which applies very much to the Police, was, people would say, well, man, it's about the music. It's all about the music. If you got the music, it's going to work. And I'd say, well, no, that's really not the case. Number one is you got to get noticed. Then it's about the music. Because if you don't get noticed, I don't care how good your music is, no one's ever going to hear it. So, you look at the great acts of the years, whether it be Elvis Presley with the sideburns and the pink Cadillac and the wiggling his hips on TV, and the Beatles with long hair, and Elton John with his wild clothes, and Lady Gaga with her, you go down the list, and the most outrageous groups are the ones that seem to get attention,
Mm-hmm.
I think in the case of the Police, the name was a good name. It got, people calling it the Police. And somebody said to Stuart, why you call it the police? And he said, because I got thousands of cars around the world advertising my group. That's a good line, but the reality was, to call yourself the police kind of jolted people, and people would go, oh, this is like when I started I.R.S. Records, people would go, I.R.S, why'd you call it? Because if I'd called it, Melvin Records, who would have cared,
Right.
but it was a jolt. It was to make people think. It was to make it memorable, and I think that's really but the police were memorable. They went out there, the three blonde guys. That was also a memorable moment. We didn't plan it, but when I saw it, I recognized it. That's the link that unify them, the three blonde guys, So you're always looking for something that makes you stand out from the crowd.
Yeah.
And I think that's all part of getting noticed. And if you get noticed, then it's okay. Let's see what the music is. And thankfully, Sting wrote hits.
Well, this next question comes from Eric L, and it is about Sting, and it is kind of about the hits too. He says, the police would not have made it, the police would not have made Sting seem like a great singer and songwriter and musician were it not for the consistently brilliant and creative accompaniment of Stuart Copeland and Andy Summers. This happens to many uncredited or undercredited musicians. Is it fair, and what should be done about it?
Well, the reality is, it's a combination of things that work. Sting on his own wasn't successful. When Stewart found him and brought him in, and they created the police, and they brought me in as manager, who's to say? Was it me? Was it Stewart? Was it Sting? But certainly Sting wrote the hits. If he didn't write Message in a Bottle and Roxanne and Can't Stand Losing You and all those, Every Breath You Take, would the band have been as that big? Well, no. But by the same token, it took Stewart's energy. It took my whatever I was doing, all those elements. And, I say in the book, I had an interesting conversation with Dave Gilmour of the Pink Floyd, where we met one night after one of his concerts where I happened to go. And he came with me back to my house, and we sat and chatted for hours. And he said to me, I reformed the Pink Floyd. And let me tell you the story, because in the early days of the Floyd, I and Roger Waters used to, we would drive home after the show, and we would think, if we had better musicians on the drums and the keyboards, and, it would just make a better group. We were always bitching about, the other players. And he said, so, and then finally the Pink Floyd broke up. Roger went his way, I went my way, and I get a new band, and I get these great, fantastic musicians, and I'm selling out a 3,000 seater, and I'm thinking, wow, I'm doing great. Of course, it wasn't the same as the Floyd selling out 30,000 seats,
Right.
But my manager comes to me and says, hey, by the way, the Pink Floyd drummer's in town. And wouldn't it be great if he came out and jumped at your last song? All your fans would love it. And he said, I kind of had a bad feeling about it because, I'd been complaining about the musicianship. And he said, so I didn't really look forward to it. But then the show kind of came to an end, and my manager said, okay, the drummer's here. Out he walks, and he sits behind the drums, and he starts playing. And he said, a funny thing happened. It felt like I put on an old pair of comfortable shoes. All of a sudden, things just seemed right. And he said, so it isn't about musicianship. It isn't about, he says, it's just something that works. And I can't put my finger on it. But he said, that drummer and keyboard player and me and Rod, it just worked. Mm-hmm. And he said, that moment, I thought, I'm going to reform the Pink Floyd. So he went back to that drummer and that keyboard player, and and they've reformed the Pink Floyd, and now he was selling out stadiums again. But that just goes to show that sometimes it isn't. Do you say, well, Sting was the police? Some people would say that, but then again, Stewart had a major hand in it. I had a major hand in it. Andy Summers had it was really a combination. And you take, it's like a jigsaw puzzle. You take one picture out, one piece out, and the picture is not complete. Which piece have you taken out? But it's still, a picture isn't quite right. And I think that's part of the message. So you can't always be, something where you say, well, okay, well, let's find what's the essence of made this work. Well, it was a kind of combination of essences, things that made it work. And, I think it's kind of a mistake to kind of zero in and think, well, there must be some essential essence that made it work. Well, it was a bunch of essences.
Synergy, we can say, and that
Yeah.
story is in this wonderful, wonderful book. We will plug that yet again. The next question shifts over to the Go-Go's from Peter A. He said, what did you hear in the Go-Go's that originally made you want to sign them?
Well, I was always looking for two things. One was that the band believed in what they were doing, and that there was some sort of gimmick to promote them. And I thought, 5 girls from LA who believed in what they were doing and had a good fan base. I mean, how bad could it be? You're thinking, well, it's obviously a winner. Something's happening here.
Right.
And they were fun. They were energetic. They were charming. The songs were fun. And I looked around the room and I was the only person there who could sign acts. And I was thinking, well, where is everybody? This is crazy. Why isn't this group, And I thought, well, it turned out, of course, the reason they weren't signed is because they were all women. And up to that point, there'd never been an all-girl group that had a #1 album in America that, the Supremes that had hit singles and, they were sort of manufactured by Motown or whatever. But the Go-Go's were genuine. They were real. They were their own. They formed, and I just thought they were destined to be successful. I didn't know they'd go to #1, but I certainly didn't stop it from happening. So we launched the record, and we went, again, it was looking for first base, getting to second, getting to third, and home. Of course, in their case, they put out that record and it became a home run. So for me, I just looked at what I personally liked. I liked them. And I thought they were engaging and fun. And I was not looking over my shoulder to see what other companies were doing.
Right.
And I think that's why I.R.S. succeeded, is because I said, look, if I like it, I'm not that crazy. Other people might like it too. So let's do it. And as long as the price was right and I could afford it, I would do it. And of course, luckily for me, nobody else was in the room. So when I went to sign the Go-Go's, they didn't hit me up with like we want $1 million advance, because I didn't have it. So yeah. I think I signed them for some paltry sum, which they were all disappointed with, but it worked out for all of us, and luckily I paid as much as I had, and it was just enough to make a hit record.
Well, credit goes to you on that. And also because a lot of record companies, and this is not a scripted question, this is a compliment, which actually warrants a response. A lot of labels had an icky vibe, like, oh, we're going with the corporate people. And or you had the artists competing with one another regularly. Yet we did see R.E.M. and the Go-Go's tour together. We did see a Buzzcocks song recorded by the Fine Young Cannibals. So you fostered a community of artists, which a lot of labels didn't do at the time. Was there an inspiration for that in particular?
Well, I always felt an obligation that because I was handling more than one group, I mean, I always felt that, for the Police, if I could put on an opening act, that would also help them, which the Go-Go's did, that I would be winning and helping the Police and be helping the Go-Go's. And I sort of always felt that I had the obligation to open up as many opportunities for all the different people. And, whether it be Jules Holland, I saw him as a personality and got him to introduce the Police on a TV show. And he was the keyboard player in Squeeze, but I thought, here's a great personality, and he's going to get the Police, and it's going to make an interesting show, and it's going to help Squeeze, So I always looked from the standpoint of cross-pollinating, because that works. Sometimes, I mean, Elvis sang songs that other people wrote for the most part, why shouldn't the Fine Young Cannibals record a song written by the Buzzcocks, or and I think that was always and that's one of the reasons I was always really happy with the Police, is they allowed me to put on whoever I wanted as an opening act. They just said, okay, Miles, if you want to put on R.E.M, fine, do it, put on the Go-Go's, and we had the Cramps open for the Police, we had Scapeface, we had some pretty wild groups, and I think it was always something that actually helped, because we were not following the sort of traditional path of if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and it was a matter of, if I like it, cool, and the police were at least open to suggestion, so I could come up with some kind of wacko opening act, and they would say, sure, why not, when I remember Sting saying to me, when I said, look, can I think Jules Holland would be a great person to introduce the band on TV and to do the, behind the music kind of thing at, the Police in Montserrat. And Sting said, well, we like Jules. He's a good musician. And yeah, why not? And the fact that they were so open to ideas, was a good thing. And I think that's another lesson that I say in the book, is that you sometimes don't know what idea is going to work. So don't just spend your life dismissing ideas, because I've had other artists that I think were probably equally as talented as the Police, but they would always second guess and, worry about whether their friends are going to like it, or, I remember some of the musicians go, oh gosh, well, what are my friends going to say? Oh, is this selling out? Or they would agonize about the decision. And I would say, just get on with it. If we make a mistake, we'll come up with something else,
Right.
Well, the Police were always like, yeah, why not? Let's do it. They didn't go for every idea, but they went for most of them, and I always found that inspirational because it kept me coming up with ideas for those acts that would always be like, oh, God, gee, I don't know about that. Oh, I have to think about that. You kind of lose interest in those acts because, your ideas just never get used. And you like to think that you're contributing to somebody's success, which I did with the Police. I mean, Roxanne, they didn't think was a hit. I did, so I can look back and say, well, without me, the Police wouldn't have happened, Of course, without Sting or without Stewart or without Andy, they wouldn't have happened either. But so I'm not going to claim that, it's because of me, but I was part of it, and that's something
Sure.
that you can kind of look back on and say, well, that's something that's, you can be proud of.
To say the least. Next question from a wonderful patron of the Long Beach Library. And of course, this is being shown by other libraries and television because the world wants to see Miles Copeland III. The best sequel that there possibly was is Miles Copeland III. Teresa B wants to know, was it more difficult to get support for girl bands than the guys? And did you ever have to fight for them to get heard? I believe that is a Go-Go's oriented question.
Yeah, well, I think, Michael Plen, who was really the kind of bulldog championing the record, at radio. And he used to say to me, he said, a lot of people dismiss them as a gimmick because they're all girls, he said, but, and I just said, well, look, let's just, it's great music, whatever, whether it's girls or guys, and I never had a feeling that women, for some reason, are disqualified. If a woman was a good bass player, let her play bass. If she was a good radio promotion person, let her be radio promotion. So I.R.S. had a lot of women in it, not because we were women oriented. It's just because we went for the best people that we could afford. Sometimes it was women, and in the case of the Bangles too, it was all women. But
Yeah.
they made great music too. So I think it would be true to say that it was tougher with women, at least in the beginning. Nowadays, of course, women are all over the place, as lead singers and,
Yeah.
But I think it had a lot to do with the Go-Go's and the Bangles and a lot of the bands we worked with, breaking through and proving that girls could write hit songs, could play hit songs, and be hit acts on their own. And not only just as singers, but as guitar players, songwriters, and whatever, I mean, I remember my songwriter retreats, and here I'm in the moment in France at this place, and one of the great songwriters that has come 3 times was Carole King. She wrote great songs. And she proved that women can write great songs just like men can. So I never was one who judged somebody because of the color of their skin or their sex. I like to think I'm, if you want to say that makes me a humanitarian, I'll take it, But to me, it was like talent is talent. I don't care whether they're British or, I worked with an Italian artist called Zucchero, who was a great talent. I worked with Argentinian artists. I worked with artists, Arab artists, Shabmami from Algeria. I put him together with Sting, great art is great art. I don't care where it comes from. You know, to me, it was like, if it's special and I can afford it, hey, let's do it.
The next question comes from Brian S. He said, Reckless Sleepers was a group signed to the I.R.S. label in the late 80s. Do you have any recollections of them or insights into that band? And I know that's a general question, but anything you're comfortable sharing will be fine.
Well, there were a lot of acts that we sort of got involved with, either because somebody in the company recommended the act. I mean, you know, as you start a label, in the beginning, it was me. You know, I mean, I signed the Buzzcocks and the Stranglers and all these bands I brought in. You know, the Cramps and Chelsea and, you know, all these different groups we brought in. And as over the years, you start adding staff, and the staff comes in and go, hey, I'm really a big fan of this act, you know, and you kind of like have to give rope to your own people, you know. So some acts got introduced to the label, not necessarily because I was choosing them, but because somebody in the company was, you know.
Right.
I mean, Jay Boberg was a big champion of R.E.M, you know. I said yes to signing them because my brother Ian was pushing them. And I depended on Ian to book all the acts. So they were going to be signed one way or another. But Jay was a champion of the group, and he kept saying, this is going to be a big group, you know. Steve Tannett in London was a big champion of the Alarm, you know, and he came to me with the Alarm. And I said very simply to him, look, if we can afford to sign them and you think they're good, let's go for it, you know, because if I had said no, you know, you lose your people, you know. So part of a record company is not just the acts you sign, but the people you work with. And I think one of the things I say in the book is that sometimes, you know, you undervalue some of the people you hire. And I think in the case of I.R.S. Records, Michael Plen was a key player, and he helped the Go-Go's go to #1. And when we lost Michael Plen as a radio man, I think the label never really quite recovered from that. And, you know, so a label is more than just the head of the company, me, or, you know, the head of radio or whatever. It could be, you know, a combination of people in there. So it all adds up, you know, and you know, so Reckless Sleepers, I don't have any particular memory of. It could have been somebody in the company pushing the act. I don't really know. There were those acts that were signed because somebody in the company thought we should sign them. And my attitude was, well, if you really are a believer, you know, let's go for it.
Cool. Next question comes from Grog Zeichner. He said, yes, please use my last name. You produced the movie. You were one of the producers on Shakes the Clown, which was Adam Sandler's first or second movie. There's a rumor, which Grog wanted to know, is it true that Martin Scorsese was a fan of this film?
I don't know that, but what I do know is that the movie was one of those sort of crazy movies where the pitch was, look, this is a movie about screwed up, sad clowns. I mean, it was just the kind of thing that would appeal. You know, you think, wait a minute, clowns that are sad and you know, mixed up and screwed up, you know. And the reality was, and it's not a movie that I would hold up and say was one of the great films we made. Matter of fact, you know, my wife hates that movie, you know, but it was one of those ones where you think, well, it was sort of a nutty idea. What the hell, you know, Shakes the Clown. I mean, it was a nutty idea movie, you know, and that was the kind of thing we did at I.R.S.
Right.
I mean, the decline of Western civilization with Penelope Ferris was another case in point. You know, she rose to become one of the most important women directors of America, and this was her first sort of feature film. You know, so I was very proud to, you know, have given an opportunity to Penelope. But we did that with, you know, Billy Bob Thornton and Bill Paxton and various others. You know, got their start at I.R.S. Records, at I.R.S. Media, which was sort of a spin-off of I.R.S. Records, you know. So in some ways with the film company, we gave opportunities to people who later became big stars.
Right. Adam Sandler included, because again, that was his first or second film, a couple of years before Billy Madison and the whole Happy Madison takeoff. So, hey, you played some sort of role in the ascent of Adam Sandler. And another name, it pops up in your book. I guess maybe it's because it got picked up by some of the classic rock kind of sites. The Steven Seagal chapter of your life, which is a couple of pages of the book. You talk about it in a humorous way. You state what happened. And do you look back on that one fondly, or is that just something that you were, writing down stories and went, I
Well,
think that
Steven
happened.
Seagal, I don't care whether you're a big fan or not, he's definitely a character.
Yes.
And to me, it was a funny, aside. I mean, I wouldn't say, am I going to hold my hand up and say, well, I was the manager of Steven Seagal and that makes me great. But he was a great character and very funny. So it was, I felt that in the book, not only am I supposed to be giving lessons and telling people what I did and hopefully people learn from it and be inspirational, but also you have to entertain, the Hassel Atkins story, the Cramps, Steven Seagal. There were a lot of those stories that were very funny, but they also have a lesson to them. And Steven Seagal was an interesting character. He was actually a pretty good guitar player.
That's the word. Yes.
And Sammy Hagar was a friend of mine. And, when I called up Sammy and said, would you put Steven on? He said, well, if he'll take $1,000, sure, I'll put him on. I called Steven, and of course, Steven, didn't care about the money. He just said, sure. So I think we must have spent 20 grand doing that show. He hired a private jet to fly to the show and had me get a bunch of records that he was going to sign. And he got bored with signing records, So, it was just one of those funny things. And he hands me these 45s and I'm going like, well, what am I supposed to do with these guns? He said, well, you got to protect yourself, So it was an amusing, we have there were, believe me, in my lifetime working with rock and roll stars, there were a lot of funny stories, and I had to include them in the book to be entertaining, because I wanted people to enjoy the book if they were not just music aficionados, people that were into I.R.S records or the Police or Sting. I wanted, everybody to be able to read it and actually find it funny and enjoyable, And I think a lot of those stories did that.
Oh, without a doubt they did. Now, that story kind of happened and got into all the news sites because of the Sammy Hagar connection. Anything Sammy does winds up getting reported on. And then that leads to a bunch of, well, what about David Lee Roth? Was David Lee Roth ever in your periphery in any level? Because there were some years when people didn't know what he was doing per se, but the music industry, he was reaching out to different managers and songwriters and producers.
Well, he never called me. Sammy did, but he didn't.
There you go. So bringing it up to speed here, you never stopped. We learned quickly into the book, 10 years before I.R.S. Records, you were very busy in the music business. After I.R.S. closed, you were very busy. As you mentioned before, there's the songwriting retreat that goes on every year, I do believe, and has yielded at least one #1 hit from those sessions right there.
Four #1s.
4 #1 hits. The most recent one I was aware of was the country song that went to #1. So the idea that I'm getting at is Miles has never stopped creating, producing, managing, etc. But what are you up to now? Please plug as much as you can besides this wonderful book.
Well, the other day, Michael Flatley called me up, and he, of course, known for Lord of the Dance. And I drove actually from, I'm in the sort of middle of France. And so I drove down to Monte Carlo to meet him. And, we got on very well. And he said, look, I need some help. I got some big ideas. And I said, well, sure, So that's an idea I'm looking at right now, is working with Michael Flatley. And I figure, well, I did a lot of work with dance shows with I had this wild idea of making a copy of Riverdance, which of course Michael Flatley started.
Yeah.
And I did it with belly dancers because I was into Arabic music ever since Desert Rose with Sting, And we did 800 shows in 25 countries with the belly dance superstars. And I learned a lot about the whole dance business, which is a bit different than rock and roll, but there's certain similarities. And I learned a lot, and so I could apply that. So I'm open to ideas basically, and it's like I'm at that point of life where I'm not thinking, well, I want to go manage the next super group, and whatever just intrigues me. If something calls up and says, look, I've got this idea, I want to do so and so, and it appeals to me, I'd say yes. But I'm not going out hanging out at clubs to find the next big group or any of this sort of stuff. So I'm really at that sort of point where, I'll if something excites me, I'll do it. If it doesn't, well, I won't.
Interesting. And it seems like rock has taken a back seat to what you're looking for. Am I incorrect about that?
Well, I'm interested. I mean, I work with Steve Vai. We do have a guitar project, which is kind of guitar oriented, which has, some of the world's great guitar players. Kenny Wade Shepherd, we've been talking to him about doing some stuff. So I'm kind of open. I still am interested in rock and roll, but I'm also interested in, what's going on around the world. Sometimes some music that is happening out of Latin America or happening in the Middle East or whatever. There's interesting music all over the world. And I think maybe that's because of my upbringing, growing up around the world. It makes your ears sort of open to things. I noticed watching Netflix, there's some interesting movies now that you can see that are made in Norway, for all places. I mean, who ever thought of Norway making a movie, and or Denmark or some of these other countries, and you realize, there's some really good filmmakers in some of these other countries making shows that are really engaging. All right, maybe it's in a foreign language, you're going to have subtitles, but the story is really good, So that's my view, basically, is, you don't lock yourself into thinking that it's only the United States or England that's going to come up with some good idea or some storyline. There's a lot of these great storylines are going to come out of some weird places, so be open to it, So I think that's part of the message of the book is, be open, because you never know where the hit's going to come from or the next thing that's going to excite people, I mean, if you look at the history of Apple Computer, people were saying, nobody cares about personal computers. Look at us today, or the cloud or this or that, or, people were talking about space travel or, there's so many things that people dismissed, that actually turned out to be the next big thing, So I think that's really part of my, what I message in the book is, don't be too precious. You never know where the next hit is coming from, I mean, my wife started buying Bitcoin and thinking, because we learned so much, and I don't quite get what Bitcoin is all about, but the idea intrigues me, and who's to know? I mean, some people are saying, well, Bitcoin's going to be, worth $1,000, well, hopefully so, or, no, sorry, it's worth 42,000 or something like that. I mean,
yeah, it's 40,
whatever.
50,
It's going to be 40 or 50, one day it's going to be worth 100 or 200 or 300, fingers crossed, but you never know, I started collecting old armor, suits of armor, and from some of the great armor makers, thinking, well, one day these guys are not going to be making armor anymore. And, the price will go. It's like old painters, a lot of the great painters who ended up, dying penniless, ended up making paintings that were selling now for 150, 200 million,
Right.
So like I say, what's strong today could be weak tomorrow, and what's weak today could be strong tomorrow. So you never be too proud. You never know.
I usually end my discussions or interviews by saying any last words for the kids, but you just kind of did that. And this book is essentially any last words for the kids. So instead, I'd like to kind of say, it sounds like you have no regrets, that you're happy with where you want to be. And there's nothing that you're looking at in your career where you go, I should have done that differently because it got to where you are now.
Well, I mean, there are certain I think anybody who says you wouldn't have done something a little bit differently, is lying, basically. I mean, there were certain things, I mean, I talk about it in the book, one of my favorite groups was Duran Duran, and I signed a management contract with them. I was the manager of Duran Duran officially, signed contract, legally, everything cool. And then we went to dinner and they asked me, what kind of advance they could get. And I knew if I told them the truth, it would not fly very well. So I decided to lie. And I said, well, we're going to get $2 million. I think that's a target we could reach, And the truth was, I think that I was pushing it to maybe $700,000 or $800,000 is more like it, And the whole, as I say in the book, the tenor of the dinner we had, the celebration dinner, just turned black, And the next day, the accountant calls me up and says, Miles, the group's very unhappy with what you said, and they think they got the wrong manager. And I went, you mean they saw through my lie? They realized I was lying to them and I was a bullshitter? They said, well, no, they actually, they were disappointed that you only said 2 million. I said, what? I said, I lied to 2 million. I said, what did they expect? He said, well, they hoped you'd said 5 million. And well, of course, they ended up getting 800,000 like they should have gotten, you know. But the point is that I didn't lie big enough, you know. And if I had lied, I would have been the manager of Duran Duran today, you know. And you know, so would I have gone back and lied bigger? Well, I probably would have, you know. And there are a couple of points like that, you know, over the years, you know, where certain acts that I signed that, you know, maybe I shouldn't have, or, you know, certain acts that, you know, there's always something, you know. But for the most part, yeah, I mean, you know, the book was kind of cathartic in the sense that, you know, you could see all the things you did, and you realized you did make mistakes, but you also had successes, and that's all part of the game. Basically, you're gonna make mistakes. That's part of the title of the book: 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So, all right, you're gonna take 2 steps forward. You know, that's good, but you're gonna have those steps backwards too. You know, those are gonna happen too, and you know, that's part of life. That's part of learning. That's part of, you know, I think with the case of the police, I used to say, yes, we made mistakes, but by the time somebody discovered a mistake, we'd had 2 more successes. So the success never dragged us back, you know. Sorry, the failures never dragged us back, because we always had successes to play off of. And I think that's really it. Just be positive and move forward. You know, I mean, what can you do? But I think that one of the best lessons of all was that really I went with my gut. You know, look, do I like it? If I like it, it must be good. Why do I need to look over my shoulder and see what everybody else likes?
Yeah.
You know, why do I have to? Well, do you like it? Well, no. Do you like it? I say, well, I like it. I really love it. It's great. Therefore, it must be great. You know, all I need to do is find the people like me who think like me. Not everybody is, but there's enough of them that do. And thankfully, in the case of the police and Jules Holland, the Squeeze, R.E.M, Fine Young Cannibals, Go-Go's, Bangles, you know, there were enough people out there that thought like I did and liked what I liked and bought the records, and we had hit records, you know. And I mean, even guys that, you know, I mean, guys like Keith Urban, who's like a big superstar now, you know, he came to the Castle songwriting retreat, you know, declaring that he wasn't good enough guitar player. You know, I forced him to come here. He met the people that he met the 2 Go-Go's who he ended up writing the #1 song with, you know. And so I had a role to play in Keith Urban. So I look back and say, well, you know, I had a hand on a lot of people, even if it wasn't, you know, in the case of him, I introduced him to the Go-Go's, which he never would have met had he not been here. So yeah. I played a role in Keith Urban becoming the top country artist, you know. And, you know, as a lot of those sort of things, you know, you put your finger on, you know, what worked, what didn't work. You know, there were other times that you put people together and nothing happened, you know. But I think with people like William Orbit, who became a superstar with, you know, I was his first, I recognized him as a producer before anybody else, and had him produce records.
Yes.
And then he did Madonna and became a superstar. And now he's sold something like 200 million records or something. So I'm proud of people like William Orbit and Jules Holland and Sting and the Police and the Go-Go's and the Bangles and Fine Young Cannibals and R.E.M and all these bands. You know, I'm proud to have been in, you know, part of the cog that helped their machine happen.
Well, with regard to bringing up Duran Duran, I apologize for spotlighting the one not success of the 25 global, eternal, perpetual successes you've had. So thank you so much for your time, Miles. Thank you for your contributions to culture as a whole, and really looking forward to everything you keep delivering in the near future.
Well, I appreciate it, and hope your show does very well. And if you think of any more questions and you ever want to talk again, I love to talk.
Thank you so much.
And man, I got the time to talk, so just call anytime.
Looking forward, man. Have a great rest of the day there out in beautiful France.
Okay, take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.